video, we're going to explain allopatric speciation and kind of put together a model answer or a model description of it that we can use in an exam question. So first of all, what is speciation? Well, evolution leads to speciation, and speciation is basically the formation of new species from a pre-existing species. Okay, so that's what speciation is, but there are two types, and I'm going to do two separate videos on them. So in this video, we're going to focus on allopatric speciation, but you can also watch my other video on sympatric speciation. Now, allopatric speciation is the most common type of speciation, and it's also probably the easiest one to understand because you kind of did this at GCSE. You just didn't call it allopatric speciation. But allopatric speciation relies on a geographical barrier. So there's some kind of geographical barrier that is physically isolating two groups of the same population, okay? So they're the same species, they were the same population, and they all lived in the same place, you know, same area at a particular time. They were capable of interbreeding to produce fertile offspring. But now there's a geographical barrier that is physically separating that population into two groups. It might be a body of water, it might be a mountain range, it might even be a massive wall or a motorway or something like that. But you've got a geographical barrier. Because of that geographical barrier, it leads to what we call reproductive isolation. So we're basically saying the ones on this side of the barrier are no longer able to reproduce with the ones on that side of the barrier because they are physically isolated by that geographical barrier, whatever it may be. So it leads to reproductive isolation, or in an exam, you could describe that as no gene flow. There's no transfer of genes anymore between those two groups because they're not reproducing because they are physically isolated by that barrier. Now, what we also need to know is either side of this barrier, there's got to be some kind of difference in environmental conditions. So you could say something in an exam question like, there's different environmental conditions either side of that geographical barrier where these two separated groups are, or you could say possibly there's different selection pressures. So there might be different predators on each side of the geographical barrier. There might be different food availabilities, there might be different diseases, or there just might be different environmental conditions, different temperatures, different soil pHs, different light intensities. There's got to be some difference that is going to cause them to evolve in different ways, right? And then we've also got to remember that there will be genetic variation in the populations. And this genetic variation will be due to mutations, changes in the DNA base sequence that can give rise to new or different alleles. Okay, so we've got our geographical barrier, which has isolated our population into two separate groups. Now there's reproductive isolation, there's no gene flow, and they are now living in different environmental conditions with different selection pressures, and we know that there's already genetic variation in a population as standard, just as the result of random mutations. But because they have different selection pressures and different environments, you've got different alleles conveying an advantage. Okay, so different alleles are going to be selected for, or different alleles are going to convey an advantage, a survival advantage in those two different areas. So different alleles convey an advantage, and individuals with these alleles, these advantageous alleles, whatever they may be, are more likely to survive and reproduce and pass on the advantageous alleles. So gradually in these two populations, you're going to get a change in allele frequencies. And because the environments or the selection pressures were different for the two different groups, there might be an advantageous allele in this group that increases in frequency and a different advantageous allele in this group that increases in frequency. So the advantageous alleles increase in frequency and the disadvantageous alleles decrease in frequency, or we can just say there's a change in allele frequency. But hopefully you can see that because there's no gene flow or there's no reproduction, they're reproductively isolated, you're getting more and more changes in the alleles in this group and more changes in the alleles in this group. And what we need to say to finish our answer is eventually the organisms or animals, whatever they may be, can no longer interbreed to produce fertile offspring. Which means they are different species, because that is the biological definition of a species, right? They can no longer interbreed to produce fertile offspring. They are now different species. We've got speciation. We've got two new species forming from one pre-existing species. It's very much like natural selection. We've just got a few extra bits and bobs to remember. This idea of alleles giving an advantage, helping them survive, they go on to reproduce, they pass on those alleles, there's a change in allele frequency. This is all language that we use in a natural selection question. But this is going to lead to the formation of new species. And if it's allopatric speciation, we need to remember that there's the geographical barrier that is leading to that reproductive isolation. Make sure you have got your notifications switched on because I'm going to be posting another video talking you through the difference between this and sympatric speciation.